The mayor's daughter thought one slap would humiliate a poor black girl forever. She never imagined it would trigger a call from the governor's office. The slap echoed across the cafeteria, silencing more than 100 students in an instant. Chloe Bennett, the mayor's daughter, stood over Jasmine Carter with the confidence of someone who had never faced consequences a day in her life. Everyone expected tears. Everyone expected a fight. Instead, Jasmine calmly pulled out her phone, sent a single message, and sat back down. 15 minutes later, the principal received a call from the governor's office. What nobody knew was that weeks earlier, Jasmine had quietly helped a stranger during a storm without asking for a name, a title, or anything in return. That stranger never forgot. And before this story was over, one act of kindness would expose hidden truths, humble the powerful, and change a young woman's life forever. The sound cracked through the Lincoln Heights High School cafeteria so sharply that every conversation died in the same instant. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. Chairs froze against the tile floor. Even the lunch staff behind the serving line looked up. For one long second, nobody moved. More than 100 students stared toward the center of the room where Chloe Bennett stood with her hand still raised. The mayor's daughter. The most recognizable student in Caldwell City. The girl who always walked through school hallways like they belonged to her family. Across from her stood Jasmine Carter, 17 years old, quiet, black, usually invisible. The left side of Jasmine's face carried the sting of what had just happened, but she never reached up to touch it. She never stepped back. She never cried. That surprised everyone, especially Chloe. Because Chloe Bennett had spent most of her life watching people react exactly the way she expected. Some got angry, some got embarrassed, some apologized even when they had done nothing wrong. But Jasmine simply looked at her, calmly, silently, as if something much larger than this moment was unfolding behind her eyes. "What?" Chloe asked loudly. The confidence in her voice sounded forced now. "You got something to say?" The cafeteria remained silent. Students exchanged nervous glances. Phones slowly appeared from pockets, not because they wanted trouble, because they sensed they were witnessing something they would remember. Jasmine finally lowered her eyes, not in defeat, not in fear. She reached into the pocket of her faded hoodie and pulled out her phone. The movement was so ordinary that it felt strange. After everything that had just happened, she wasn't yelling, she wasn't arguing, she wasn't even looking at Chloe anymore. Her fingers moved across the screen. A short message, only 4 words. She pressed send, then slipped the phone away. Chloe laughed. A few of her friends laughed too, but the laughter sounded uncertain. "What are you doing?" one of them asked. Jasmine looked at her. Nothing more. Nothing less. Then she quietly sat back down in her chair. The silence somehow became heavier, because people understood anger. They understood tears. They understood revenge. But they didn't understand this. At the edge of the cafeteria, Assistant Principal Robert Harris finally rushed forward. "That's enough," he said. His voice shook slightly. "Everybody put your phones away. Now." No one moved. Several students kept recording. Harris glanced toward Chloe. For a brief moment, something passed across his face. Worry. Not concern for Jasmine. Concern about who Chloe's father was. Mayor Thomas Bennett, the most powerful man in Caldwell City. A man whose picture hung in government buildings. A man who appeared on television almost every week. A man whose approval ratings seemed to climb no matter what happened. Harris cleared his throat. "Miss Bennett, perhaps you should return to your table."
Of course, that works.
Chloe smiled.
Thank you.
The smile of someone who expected protection. the smile of someone who had seen adults solve problems for her before. Fine. She brushed imaginary dust from her designer jacket. Just trying to keep standards around here. A few students lowered their eyes. Others looked disgusted. Nobody challenged her. Not openly. The principal arrived moments later. Then school security. Then teachers. The entire scene began transforming into something official. Something controlled. Something managed. Exactly the way powerful people preferred. Jasmine remained seated. She stared out one of the cafeteria windows where clouds drifted across a bright afternoon sky. Outside, yellow school buses rested beyond the football field. Everything looked normal. Everything looked peaceful. Yet inside the cafeteria, something had shifted. Something invisible. Something that couldn't be undone. Across the room, Chloe returned to her table. Her friends surrounded her immediately. That girl is so weird. I can't believe she thought she could sit there. She's probably texting her grandma. The group laughed. But Chloe wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes drifted back toward Jasmine. Something felt wrong. She couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the way Jasmine hadn't reacted. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Or maybe it was the simple fact that for the first time in years, Chloe didn't feel like the winner after humiliating someone. The feeling irritated her. She pushed it away. By the time lunch ended, rumors were already spreading through the hallways. Students whispered. Teachers exchanged looks. Several videos had already been uploaded. Others had been sent through private group chats. The story was moving faster than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Jasmine walked alone through the crowded hallway. Nobody stopped her. Nobody spoke. She moved quietly between rows of lockers until she reached the school's east entrance. Sunlight spilled across the concrete steps. The afternoon air felt warm. For a moment, she closed her eyes. Her father used to tell her something. A lesson he repeated whenever life felt unfair. You don't find out who people are when everything is easy. You find out who they are when they think they can hurt you. The memory made her smile sadly. Her father had been gone for 3 years. Some days the loss felt distant. Other days it felt like yesterday. Today felt like yesterday. A vibration buzzed inside her pocket. Her phone. One new message. No name appeared. Only a simple reply. 3 words. I understand. Coming. Jasmine read it once, then locked the screen. Far across the city, inside a government building wrapped in glass and afternoon sunlight, another phone began to ring. A woman sitting in a conference room glanced down at the screen. The moment she saw the sender's name, her expression changed. She stood immediately. The meeting around her stopped. Is everything okay? Someone asked. The woman nodded slowly. No. Then she picked up her phone. Outside the conference room window, the state capitol flag moved gently in the wind. Inside, a chain of events had just begun, and neither Chloe Bennett nor her father had any idea that a simple moment in a school cafeteria was about to become the biggest mistake their family had ever made. Because Jasmine Carter was not alone. And the person who had just received that message had never forgotten the kindness of a girl she met on a rainy afternoon. Not for a single day. The call that would change everything was already being made. 15 minutes later, Principal Harris's office phone rang. He answered casually. Then his face lost all color. The voice on the other end identified itself immediately. The office of the governor. And suddenly, the entire situation looked very different. Very different indeed. 3 weeks earlier, before the phone call, before the cafeteria, before anyone in Caldwell City had a reason to say Jasmine Carter's name, life moved at a slower pace in the Southside neighborhood where she lived. The neighborhood sat beyond the polished downtown district and far from the waterfront restaurants where tourists took photographs. Here, old brick apartment buildings leaned slightly with age. Bus stops carried layers of faded advertisements. Murals painted years ago stretched across concrete walls, telling stories of people who worked hard and rarely appeared on television. Every morning before sunrise, Jasmine woke to the sound of city buses groaning through the darkness. Her bedroom was small, a narrow bed, a wooden dresser with chipped corners, a framed photograph of her father sitting beside her lamp. The picture had been taken years earlier. He wore a work uniform and a tired smile. Whenever Jasmine looked at it, she remembered his voice. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady. The kind of voice that made difficult things seem manageable. Her grandmother, Evelyn Carter, was already awake when Jasmine entered the kitchen. The smell of coffee filled the apartment. Golden sunlight pushed through old curtains. "You sleep okay, baby?" Evelyn asked. Jasmine nodded. "Pretty good." Her grandmother smiled. She knew that wasn't entirely true. Jasmine rarely complained, but grief had a way of lingering in quiet places. 3 years had passed since her father died. 3 years since the hospital room. 3 years since medical bills swallowed nearly everything the family had saved. Yet some mornings still felt fresh. Some mornings still hurt. Evelyn placed a plate of toast in front of her granddaughter. "You got school." "I know. And volunteering after?" "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn shook her head with affectionate disbelief. "You work harder than most adults I know." Jasmine laughed softly. "Somebody has to." Outside, the city was beginning to wake. Delivery trucks rumbled down side streets. Children waited for school buses. Store owners unlocked doors. Jasmine walked 6 blocks to Lincoln Heights High School carrying a backpack that had been repaired twice with careful stitching. Most students never noticed. A few did. The ones who noticed usually belonged to Chloe Bennett's circle. The comments rarely came directly. Whispers, smirks, little jokes disguised as observations. The kind of cruelty that allowed people to pretend they weren't being cruel. Jasmine had learned long ago that responding only encouraged more of it. So she focused on other things. Classes, books, work, people who mattered. By 3 o'clock that afternoon, she was already crossing town toward St. Matthew's Community Kitchen. The building sat beside an aging church near an abandoned factory district. The paint was peeling. The parking lot was cracked. The roof leaked whenever storms rolled through. Yet every evening, dozens of people lined up outside. Some were elderly. Some had lost jobs. Some simply needed help making it through another week. Jasmine loved the place. Inside, industrial lights cast a warm glow over metal counters. The smell of soup and fresh bread floated through the air. Volunteers moved between tables carrying trays and coffee cups. "Hey, Jasmine. Good afternoon. Can you help in the serving line?" She answered every request with the same smile. For nearly 2 years, she had spent afternoons there. Nobody paid her. Nobody asked her to stay. She simply kept showing up. An older volunteer named Mrs. Linda often teased her. "You know, one day some rich person is going to notice all this kindness." Jasmine laughed every time. "That's not why I do it." "I know." Mrs. Linda pointed a spoon at her. "That's exactly why it'll happen." The afternoon passed quietly. Jasmine helped carry supplies. She cleaned tables. She sat with an elderly veteran who wanted someone to listen while he talked about his grandchildren. She helped a young mother entertain 2 restless children while their meals were prepared. Small things. Ordinary things. The kind of things that never made headlines. By evening, dark clouds had begun gathering above Caldwell City. Heavy summer clouds, the kind that turned the sky charcoal gray before releasing rain. Thunder rolled in the distance. Volunteers glanced toward the windows. Storm's coming. They were right. An hour later, rain hammered the streets. Water rushed through gutters. Wind bent tree branches. The parking lot disappeared beneath shimmering reflections of streetlights. Most people hurried home. Jasmine stayed behind, helping close the kitchen. When the last trays were stacked and the floors were mopped, she finally grabbed her backpack. Outside, rain poured from the sky in silver sheets. Mrs. Linda frowned. "You got a ride?" "No." "You waiting this out?" Jasmine looked at the storm. Probably. But something caught her attention. Across the parking lot, near the entrance, a figure stumbled. A woman, middle-aged, well-dressed but soaked by the rain. She reached for a railing, missed it, and nearly fell. Without thinking, Jasmine dropped her backpack and ran. The cold rain drenched her within seconds. "Ma'am!" The woman tried to smile. "I'm all right." She clearly wasn't. One hand pressed against her leg. Pain showed across her face. Jasmine slipped beneath her arm and helped steady her. "Let's get you inside." The woman hesitated, then nodded. Together they crossed the parking lot while rain pounded around them. Inside the kitchen, volunteers immediately rushed over. Someone brought a chair. Someone brought towels. Jasmine disappeared into the supply room and returned with her own jacket, the only one she had. She wrapped it around the woman's shoulders. The stranger looked surprised. "You'll need this." "I'm okay," Jasmine said. The woman studied her, noticing the worn shoes, the patched backpack, the exhausted kindness, the kind that couldn't be faked. For several minutes they sat together while thunder echoed outside. The woman accepted hot soup, a cup of coffee, simple conversation. Nothing more, nothing less. Eventually she asked, "Do you always do this?" Jasmine looked confused. "Do what?" "Help people." Jasmine smiled. "My dad used to say everybody's carrying something you can't see." The woman was quiet. "And if they're carrying something heavy, then maybe they need somebody to be kind." For a moment, neither spoke. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The storm was beginning to weaken. Finally, the woman smiled. A genuine smile. The kind that reached her eyes. "One day," she said softly, "this kindness is going to find its way back to you." Jasmine laughed. "I doubt that." But outside, across the street, a black government vehicle waited silently in the rain. And inside that vehicle, someone was already wondering who this remarkable young girl really was. A question that would soon change everything. The rain finally eased sometime after 9 that evening. The parking lot outside St. Matthew's Community Kitchen shimmered beneath streetlights that reflected in puddles like scattered pieces of gold. Jasmine stood beneath the awning, watching the storm drift east across the city. Most of the volunteers had gone home. Only a few remained inside, finishing the last of the cleanup. The woman she had helped sat comfortably near the entrance now, her color returning. A driver in a dark suit had arrived 20 minutes earlier, but instead of rushing her away, the woman had stayed. She seemed oddly interested in talking. Not about politics, not about status, not about work, about people, about life, about Jasmine. "What grade are you in?" she asked. "Senior year." "Thinking about college?" Jasmine smiled faintly. Thinking about it and paying for it are two different things. The woman laughed softly. "Fair point." For a moment they listened to the rainwater dripping from the roof. "You seem young to carry so much responsibility." Jasmine shrugged. "You do what you have to do." The woman studied her. There was no self-pity in her voice, no bitterness, just acceptance, the kind that came from years of adapting. "What about your parents?" the woman asked carefully. The smile on Jasmine's face softened. My grandmother raised me most of my life. And your father? The answer came after a pause. He passed away 3 years ago. The woman's expression changed immediately. I'm sorry. Jasmine nodded. Thank you. Neither spoke for several seconds. The grief wasn't fresh anymore. But grief didn't disappear. It simply learned how to live beside you. My dad worked for the city, Jasmine continued. Maintenance department. The woman looked interested. What was he like? A warm smile appeared, the biggest smile she had shown all evening. He was the best person I've ever known. The answer came so quickly that it surprised even Jasmine. He used to help everybody. Everybody? Everybody, she laughed quietly. If somebody's car broke down, he'd stop. If somebody needed groceries, he'd help. If somebody lost a job, he'd find a way to connect them with someone. The woman listened carefully. And he never asked for anything back? Never. The smile remained. My grandmother used to tell him he couldn't save the whole world. And what would he say? Jasmine's eyes drifted toward the rain. He'd say maybe not. But you can make one person's day better. The woman became very quiet. There was something about those words, something familiar, something important. Finally she stood. Her leg appeared stronger now. The driver approached immediately. Ma'am, we should probably get moving. She nodded, then turned back to Jasmine. Thank you. It wasn't a big deal. The woman smiled. It was. Before Jasmine could respond, the woman extended her hand. Jasmine shook it. The grip was warm, confident, the hand of someone accustomed to responsibility. My name is Margaret. Only Margaret. Nothing more. No title? No explanation? Nice to meet you. And you too, Jasmine. The woman looked at her for another second, almost as if memorizing her face. Then she walked toward the waiting vehicle. The driver opened the rear door. The moment the woman entered, the SUV pulled away. Its taillights disappeared into the wet darkness. Jasmine watched until it was gone. Then she picked up her backpack and began the walk home. She never noticed the state government seal mounted discreetly on the front license plate. She never noticed the second vehicle following behind. She never noticed the conversation taking place inside. Margaret Reynolds sat silently for almost a minute. The city lights passed beyond the window. Finally, the driver spoke. You okay? Margaret smiled. Yes. You seem thoughtful. I am. The driver nodded. Neither spoke again. But Margaret kept thinking about the girl at the community kitchen. The patched backpack. The worn shoes. The kindness. Most people changed when they thought nobody important was watching. Jasmine had done the opposite. That stayed with her. Across town, Jasmine arrived home shortly before 10. Her grandmother was waiting. A lamp glowed beside the living room window. The television played quietly. The smell of cinnamon tea filled the apartment. There she is. Jasmine smiled. Sorry I'm late. You were helping people again. It wasn't a question. Jasmine laughed. Maybe. Evelyn shook her head. Your father would have been proud. The words landed gently, yet they carried weight. Jasmine looked away for a moment. The photograph on the bookshelf caught her attention. Her father stood beside an old city truck, smiling, always smiling. Sometimes she wondered how he had managed it. Life hadn't been easy for him. Bills, long hours, health problems. Yet somehow he stayed kind, as if kindness itself was a decision, a discipline, a promise. She carried her tea into her bedroom later that night and sat beside the window, Rain still dripped from rooftops. The city seemed peaceful. For a while she worked on scholarship applications. Most ended the same way. Financial need, academic performance, community service. The forms asked questions. What challenges have you faced? Who inspired you? Why do you want to continue your education? Jasmine paused over the last one, then began typing. Because I want to help people the way my father helped people. Simple, honest, enough. Hours later, she finally fell asleep. The next morning brought sunlight. The storm was gone. Life resumed its normal rhythm. School, classes, assignments, lunch, hallways, the same routine, or at least it seemed that way. What Jasmine didn't know was that someone else was thinking about her too. At the state government center nearly 60 miles away, Margaret Reynolds sat in a conference room reviewing reports. Large windows overlooked the Capitol grounds. Staff members discussed budgets, programs, policy recommendations. Yet Margaret's attention drifted. Eventually, she interrupted the meeting. I need information on someone. The room grew quiet. One assistant looked surprised. Who? A student. Margaret opened a small notebook. She had written the name before leaving Caldwell City. Jasmine Carter. The assistant nodded. I'll see what I can find. Margaret closed the notebook. Thank you. Then she returned to the meeting. But a feeling lingered, a feeling she rarely experienced. Hope. Because every now and then, in a world full of noise, ambition, and self-interest, you met someone who reminded you what character looked like. Someone who did the right thing simply because it was right. And Margaret Reynolds had a feeling she hadn't met Jasmine Carter by accident. Back at Lincoln Heights High School, another pair of eyes had begun watching Jasmine too. Not with admiration, not with gratitude, with irritation. From across the cafeteria, Chloe Bennett noticed teachers greeting Jasmine. She noticed students liking her. She noticed that people respected her without trying. And for reasons she couldn't fully explain, that bothered her. A lot. The feeling would only grow stronger in the days ahead. Strong enough to set two lives on a collision course neither girl could yet see. And when that collision finally came, then the entire city would feel the impact. Lincoln Heights High School looked beautiful from a distance. The red brick buildings sat on a gentle hill overlooking Caldwell City. American flags moved softly above the entrance. Freshly painted walkways stretched between classrooms. Flower beds lined the front lawn. Parents loved it. Politicians loved visiting it. Newspapers loved photographing it. But like every place, Lincoln Heights had two versions, the version people saw, and the version students lived. By the time Jasmine Carter arrived each morning, most of the parking lot was already full. Teachers carried coffee cups through the cool air. Students gathered near the front steps. School buses released waves of teenagers into the morning sunlight. Jasmine moved through the crowd quietly. Not invisible. Not exactly. People knew who she was. The girl who volunteered at St. Matthew's. The girl with the perfect attendance record. The girl who never caused trouble. The girl who always helped. What few people realized was how often kindness came with a price, especially when you were poor. Especially when people had already decided who you were before you opened your mouth. Inside the school, another student entered through a different doorway. Everything changed when Chloe Bennett arrived. Conversations shifted, heads turned, teachers smiled wider, students stepped aside. The effect wasn't subtle. It never had been. Chloe walked through the hallways surrounded by friends, confidence, and the invisible protection that came with being Mayor Thomas Bennett's daughter. She was beautiful, photogenic, popular, the kind of student local newspapers loved to feature during charity drives and community events. Her social media pages attracted thousands of followers. She had attended ribbon cuttings, holiday parades, political fundraisers. Everywhere she went, cameras seemed to follow. Most people assumed that kind of attention created happiness. They were wrong. Because underneath the confidence lived something else. A constant need to remain important, to remain admired, to remain above everyone else. And lately, something had been bothering Chloe. Jasmine Carter. Not because Jasmine challenged her, not because Jasmine competed with her, because Jasmine seemed completely unaffected by her. One afternoon, Chloe sat with her usual group near the cafeteria windows. Sunlight poured across polished tables. Students filled the room with laughter and conversation. Across the cafeteria, Jasmine sat with a textbook open beside her lunch tray. Reading. Quiet. Content. Chloe noticed. Again. She's doing it again, Chloe said. One of her friends looked over. Doing what? Acting like she doesn't care. The friend laughed. Maybe she doesn't. The answer irritated Chloe more than it should have. Everybody cared. Everybody wanted something. Attention. Approval. Recognition. That was how the world worked. At least that was how Chloe believed the world worked. Yet Jasmine never seemed interested. Never tried to join the popular crowd. Never tried to impress anyone. Never chased attention. It made no sense. A few tables away, two freshmen struggled to carry a stack of posters for an upcoming fundraiser. One slipped. Several posters scattered across the floor. Before anyone else reacted, Jasmine stood. She crossed the cafeteria, helped gather everything, smiled, said something that made the younger students laugh, then returned to her seat. Simple. Ordinary. Forgettable. Except Chloe couldn't stop watching. What is your problem with her? Another friend asked. Chloe shrugged. I don't have a problem. The answer came too quickly. Everyone noticed, including Chloe. The truth was more complicated. Jasmine represented something Chloe didn't understand. Someone who wasn't impressed by status. Someone who didn't orbit around power. Someone who seemed perfectly comfortable being herself. And somehow that felt threatening. Later that week, the student council met after school. Chloe served as vice president, mostly because nobody had wanted to run against her. The meeting took place in a classroom overlooking the football field. Orange sunlight stretched across rows of desks. The annual school fundraising luncheon was approaching, one of the largest events of the year. Business owners would attend, community leaders, reporters, even city officials. The principal wanted everything perfect. As students discussed decorations and seating charts, Jasmine entered carrying several boxes of donated supplies. She wasn't on student council. She was helping a teacher. The moment she walked in, several adults thanked her. One even called her remarkable. The compliment lasted less than 3 seconds. But Chloe noticed. Again. After Jasmine left, Chloe leaned back in her chair. People sure seem to love her. A teacher smiled. That's because she earns it. The room moved on. The conversation continued. But the words stayed with Chloe. She earns it. The phrase bothered her all evening. Because if she was honest, most of the things people admired about her had simply been handed to her. The thought arrived unexpectedly. She immediately pushed it away. At home that night, the Bennett residence glowed beneath carefully designed landscape lighting. The mansion sat atop a hill in the wealthiest neighborhood in Caldwell City. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. Luxury vehicles filled the driveway. Everything looked perfect. Inside, Mayor Thomas Bennett prepared for a television interview. Staff members moved through the house. Phones rang. Schedules changed. Political life never stopped. Chloe entered the kitchen and found her father reviewing notes. You look annoyed, he said. She laughed. You always know. He smiled. Occupational hazard. For a moment, she considered mentioning Jasmine. Instead, she said, school stuff. Her father nodded without looking up. Don't let small things become big things. Simple advice. Easy advice. The kind successful people often gave. Neither of them realized how ironic those words would become. Across town, Jasmine's evening looked very different. She sat at a worn kitchen table helping her grandmother sort bills. A baseball game played quietly on television. Rain tapped lightly against the windows. Life felt ordinary, comfortable, safe. Evelyn adjusted her glasses. Look at this electric bill. Jasmine smiled. Could be worse. You always say that. Because it's true. Her grandmother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. You sound just like your father. The room grew quiet, not sad, warm, the kind of silence shared by people who loved each other deeply. Later that night, Jasmine finished homework beside her bedroom window. The city lights shimmered beyond the rooftops. Somewhere downtown, powerful people attended dinners and meetings. Somewhere in government offices, decisions were made. Somewhere in expensive neighborhoods, lives unfolded very differently from her own. Yet Jasmine rarely thought about any of that. She thought about tomorrow, about helping at St. Matthew's, about graduating, about making her father proud. Meanwhile, across the city, another conversation was taking place. Inside a government office, Margaret Reynolds reviewed a small folder delivered earlier that afternoon. The cover contained a photograph. Jasmine Carter, academic records, volunteer history, scholarship recommendations, teacher comments. Margaret read every page carefully. The more she learned, the more impressed she became. Finally, she closed the folder. A thoughtful smile crossed her face. Interesting, she whispered. Outside her office window, the lights of the state capitol glowed against the night sky. A decision was beginning to form. A decision that would eventually change Jasmine's future. But first, something else had to happen. Something neither Margaret nor Jasmine could stop. The annual fundraising luncheon was only days away. Teachers were finalizing guest lists. Students were preparing decorations. Tables were being assigned. And a simple seating mistake was quietly making its way toward the center of the storm. A mistake that would place Jasmine Carter and Chloe Bennett at the same table, the same moment, the same spotlight. And once that happened, there would be no turning back. Friday arrived bright and warm, the kind of late summer day that made Caldwell City look like a postcard. Blue skies stretched over downtown. Flags moved lazily in the breeze. The sidewalks around Lincoln Heights High School buzzed with activity long before classes ended. Today was important. The annual community fundraising luncheon, one of the school's biggest events. Business leaders would attend. Local reporters would attend. Members of the city council would attend. Even representatives from several charitable organizations had accepted invitations. Teachers hurried through hallways carrying clipboards and seating charts. Student volunteers arranged centerpieces. Cafeteria workers transformed the normally noisy lunchroom into something elegant. White tablecloths covered long tables. Fresh flowers sat in glass vases. Soft instrumental music played through speakers. For a few hours, Lincoln Heights would look less like a public school and more like a banquet hall. Jasmine arrived early to help. She always did. By 8 o'clock, she was already unloading donated supplies from a delivery truck behind the school. Boxes of bottled water, bags of rolls, decorations, program booklets. The work was exhausting. She loved it. Principal Harris spotted her carrying 2 heavy boxes at once. You know you're not required to do all this. Jasmine smiled. I know. Then why do you? The answer came naturally. Because somebody needs to. The principal shook his head. You remind me of your father. For a moment, Jasmine froze. Not visibly, only inside. The mention of her father still carried weight. Even after 3 years, especially after 3 years. Some wounds learned how to become quiet. They never disappeared. She nodded politely and continued working. Across campus, Chloe Bennett was having a very different morning. A stylist had visited the Bennett home before school. A makeup artist had touched up details for photographs. A local magazine planned to cover the luncheon. The mayor's daughter expected attention. Attention usually arrived. When Chloe entered the school building, several students immediately complimented her outfit. She accepted the compliments with practiced ease. By now, it felt normal, expected, necessary. Her friends surrounded her, excited, chatty, admiring. One of them mentioned Jasmine. The mood changed instantly. Did you see Carter carrying boxes this morning? Another girl laughed. She practically lives here. Some people really need everybody to know they're good people. The group giggled. Chloe smiled faintly, but her eyes narrowed. For reasons she couldn't explain, she felt irritated again. The same irritation had been growing for weeks. Every time a teacher praised Jasmine, every time another student thanked her, every time someone spoke about her with genuine respect. The feeling sat beneath Chloe's skin like a splinter, small, constant, impossible to ignore. By noon, guests began arriving. Luxury cars filled the parking lot. Local business owners walked through the entrance carrying donation checks. Television crews set up cameras. Reporters greeted city officials. The atmosphere felt festive, important, polished. Inside the cafeteria, students guided guests toward assigned tables. Everything seemed perfect, until a simple mistake happened. Mrs. Donnelly, one of the teachers managing seating arrangements, discovered a last-minute problem. 2 guests had canceled. Several seats near the front remained empty. The table happened to be designated for scholarship nominees and student volunteers being recognized during the luncheon. Jasmine's name was already on a backup list. Without thinking twice, Mrs. Donnelly approached her. Jasmine? Yes, ma'am. We need someone at table 3. Jasmine glanced toward the front of the room. The table sat beneath a banner celebrating student leadership. Several community leaders were already seated nearby. Are you sure? Absolutely. Mrs. Donnelly smiled. You earned it. The words felt kind, simple. Nothing more. Jasmine thanked her and moved toward the table. She had no idea who else had noticed. Unfortunately, Chloe Bennett noticed immediately. She was seated nearby, close enough to see everything. Close enough to watch Jasmine take her place. Close enough to feel that familiar irritation suddenly become something stronger, something sharper. One of Chloe's friends leaned toward her. Why is she sitting there? I have no idea. Another friend rolled her eyes. Maybe they ran out of actual leaders. A few people laughed. Chloe forced to smile, but she couldn't look away. Across the room, Jasmine sat quietly, listening, smiling politely, thanking people who introduced themselves. She wasn't trying to stand out. That somehow made it worse, because attention kept finding her anyway. The luncheon officially began. Speeches followed. Awards were announced. Donations were recognized. The atmosphere remained warm and positive, until one particular moment. A local nonprofit director stood and thanked student volunteers. Among the names mentioned was Jasmine Carter. The applause surprised her. She looked embarrassed, modest, genuine. Several guests smiled warmly. One elderly businessman even stood briefly to shake her hand. The room applauded again. And suddenly, Chloe felt something she had never felt before. Threatened. Not because Jasmine had power. Not because Jasmine had influence. Because Jasmine was earning admiration. Real admiration. The kind that couldn't be inherited. The kind that couldn't be purchased. The kind Chloe secretly feared she didn't possess. The applause ended. The luncheon continued. But Chloe's mood darkened. Her friends noticed. Ignore it. I'm trying. Yet she wasn't. She kept watching. Every smile directed toward Jasmine felt personal. Every compliment sounded louder. Every moment of recognition felt unfair. The emotions built gradually, minute after minute, comment after comment, until they became impossible to control. Then came the final trigger. A photographer approached table 3. Miss Carter, can I get a quick picture for the community newsletter? Jasmine looked surprised. Oh, sure. The photographer snapped 2 photos. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary. Yet Chloe watched the exchange unfold, and something inside her finally snapped. Without fully thinking, she stood. One of her friends grabbed her arm. Chloe. Too late. She was already moving. The room remained busy enough that few people noticed immediately. Guests continued eating. Servers moved between tables. Conversations filled the air. Jasmine looked up only when a shadow appeared beside her table. She saw Chloe standing there. Perfect hair, perfect smile, cold eyes. For a second, nobody spoke. What are you doing here? Chloe asked. The question sounded polite. The tone did not. Jasmine blinked. I'm sorry? This section is reserved. Several nearby conversations stopped. People began listening. Jasmine remained calm. I was assigned this table. Chloe laughed. A short laugh. Sharp. Dismissive. I'm sure you were. A few guests exchanged uncomfortable looks. The room's energy shifted. Slowly, noticeably. Jasmine could feel it. So could everyone nearby. I'm just trying to enjoy lunch. Her voice remained quiet. Respectful. That somehow made Chloe angrier, because there was no argument, no attitude, no challenge, only calm. The thing Chloe wanted least. Someone at another table whispered, "This isn't good." The whisper spread. Eyes turned. More conversations stopped. The luncheon's cheerful atmosphere began disappearing. What exactly makes you think you belong here? Chloe asked. The question landed heavily. Several people immediately looked uncomfortable. Jasmine lowered her fork. The room seemed strangely quiet now. She could hear silverware clinking in distant corners. Could hear air conditioning humming softly overhead. Could hear her own heartbeat. Yet her voice remained steady. I belong wherever I'm invited. A few guests nodded. The answer was simple, reasonable, true. For a brief moment, Chloe could have walked away. She could have laughed. She could have changed the subject. She could have ended everything right there. Instead, she took one final step forward. The room froze. Students stared. Teachers looked alarmed. Principal Harris started moving across the cafeteria. Too slowly. Much too slowly. Because history often changes in the space between a decision and a consequence. And Chloe Bennett had already made hers. The next few seconds would become the most talked about moment in Caldwell City. A moment captured from multiple angles. A moment that would spread far beyond Lincoln Heights High School. A moment that would ultimately reach people neither girl had ever met. And at the center of it all sat Jasmine Carter, calm, composed, completely unaware that her life was about to change forever. For a brief second, The entire cafeteria seemed suspended in time. The music still played softly through the speakers. The scent of fresh bread and roasted chicken still drifted through the room. Sunlight still poured through the tall windows. Yet everything felt different. Every eye was fixed on Chloe Bennett and Jasmine Carter. Nobody was eating anymore. Nobody was talking. The tension had become impossible to ignore. Principal Harris moved quickly through the crowd. "Chloe," he called. His voice sounded strained. "Let's take a step back." But Chloe barely heard him. She was staring at Jasmine, and Jasmine was still sitting calmly in her chair. That calmness felt like gasoline on a fire. Because Chloe wanted a reaction. She wanted embarrassment. She wanted tears. She wanted proof that she still controlled the moment. Instead, she found herself facing someone who refused to surrender her dignity. "You think you're special now?" Chloe asked. Several guests shifted uncomfortably. A television reporter lowered his camera. One teacher quietly whispered, "Please stop." But Chloe continued, "You get a little attention, and suddenly you think you're somebody." Jasmine slowly stood. Not aggressively. Not defensively. Simply because remaining seated suddenly felt wrong. Their eyes met. One girl surrounded by power, the other surrounded by nothing except character. The contrast could not have been clearer. "I never said I was special," Jasmine replied softly. The answer should have ended the confrontation. Instead, it somehow made everything worse, because there was no arrogance in her voice, no insult, no challenge, only honesty. The room became painfully quiet. Then the moment happened. Fast, unexpected, and yet somehow inevitable. A brief movement, a loss of control, a choice that could never be taken back. Gasps immediately filled the cafeteria. Several students covered their mouths. A glass tipped over somewhere near the back of the room. The sound echoed across the silence. Principal Harris froze. Teachers froze. Guests froze. Even Chloe's friends looked shocked. Not because they believed Chloe incapable of crossing a line, because they had never expected her to cross one so publicly. For one long second, nobody moved. Jasmine remained standing, her head slightly turned, her expression unreadable. The room waited. Everyone expected anger, or humiliation, or tears. Instead, Jasmine slowly looked back at Chloe. The sadness in her eyes surprised everyone, including Chloe. Because it wasn't the sadness of someone who had been defeated. It was the sadness of someone disappointed. Deeply disappointed, as if Chloe had just revealed something unfortunate about herself. The realization hit Chloe immediately, and she hated it. "Say something," one of Chloe's friends whispered. Jasmine didn't. She simply reached into her hoodie pocket, pulled out her phone, and unlocked the screen. The action felt almost surreal. Several students exchanged confused glances. "What is she doing?" "I don't know. Is she recording?" "No." Jasmine typed carefully. One sentence, 4 words. Her thumb pressed send. Then she locked the screen. That was all. No speech, no threat, no argument. Nothing. The silence that followed felt heavier than any shouting match could have been. Chloe laughed nervously. A brittle sound. Forced. Seriously? Nobody joined her. Not even her closest friends. The principal finally reached them. "Everyone sit down." No one listened. People were too busy staring. A local reporter quietly checked his phone. Another guest looked around and shook his head. Several students continued recording despite repeated requests to stop. Something important had happened. Everyone could feel it, even if nobody fully understood why. Jasmine slowly picked up her bag. "I'm going home," she said. Her voice remained calm. The principal looked relieved. "Maybe that's best." A teacher offered to walk with her. Jasmine declined politely. Then she began moving toward the exit. The crowd parted without being asked. Students stepped aside. Teachers stepped aside. Even guests moved out of her path. Not because they feared her, because they respected her. The difference mattered. As Jasmine reached the cafeteria doors, she paused briefly, not long enough to create drama, just long enough to glance back. The room looked strange. The beautiful decorations, the expensive table settings, the smiling faces that had filled the luncheon earlier. All of it now felt hollow. One careless act had changed everything. Then she walked away. Outside, the afternoon air felt warm against her skin. The parking lot shimmered beneath the sunlight. Birds moved across the cloudless sky. The world looked exactly the same. Yet somehow, nothing felt the same. Her phone vibrated. A reply. Only 3 words. "I understand. Coming." Jasmine read the message once, then slipped the phone away. Back inside the cafeteria, panic was beginning to spread. Not public panic. Private panic. Adult panic. The dangerous kind. Principal Harris immediately gathered several staff members. "We need every video deleted." The words left his mouth before he could stop himself. A younger teacher stared at him. "What?" "We need control of this." Several adults exchanged uneasy looks. Control. That was the word powerful institutions always used. Control the narrative. Control the damage. Control the story. Unfortunately for them, stories rarely stayed controlled anymore. Not in a world filled with smartphones. Not in a world connected by social media. By the time the luncheon ended, copies of the video had already left the building. Students shared them. Parents received them. Group chats exploded with notifications. The incident began spreading beyond Lincoln Heights, beyond Caldwell City, beyond anything Principal Harris could manage. Meanwhile, Chloe sat alone at her table. For the first time all afternoon, nobody was talking to her. Her friends stood nearby, whispering among themselves. Guests avoided eye contact. Even some teachers appeared distant. The shift was subtle, but she noticed. She always noticed. A knot formed in her stomach. She didn't like it. Not one bit. At City Hall, Mayor Thomas Bennett was finishing a meeting about economic development when his communications director entered unexpectedly. The interruption alone was unusual. The expression on the man's face was worse. "We have a situation." The mayor sighed. "What happened now?" The communications director handed him a phone. A video was already playing. For several seconds, the mayor watched silently. His jaw tightened. His shoulders stiffened. Then he set the phone down. "How many people have seen this?" "We don't know yet." The answer was not reassuring. The mayor rubbed his forehead. "I'll handle Chloe." He sounded confident. Certain. The way powerful people often sounded when confronting problems. Unfortunately, this problem was already growing beyond his reach. Far beyond. Because at almost that exact moment, inside a government office nearly 60 miles away, Margaret Reynolds received a notification on her phone. She glanced down, saw the video thumbnail, and immediately pressed play. The room around her disappeared. The meeting disappeared. Everything disappeared except the image of one young woman she recognized instantly. Jasmine Carter, the girl from the community kitchen, the girl who had helped a stranger in the rain, the girl who never asked for anything in return. Margaret watched the entire clip. Then she watched it again. The second viewing took even less time. because by then she had already made her decision. She stood. Every person in the room looked up. Cancel the rest of the afternoon. Someone blinked. Ma'am? Margaret picked up her phone. Get me Caldwell City. Outside the office windows, the state capitol gleamed beneath the late afternoon sun. Inside, a chain reaction had begun, and before the day was over, Lincoln Heights High School would receive a phone call that no one expected. A phone call powerful enough to turn fear into panic, and panic into consequences. The first ring was already on its way. The phone rang inside Principal Harris's office at exactly 4:17 that afternoon. Outside the window, students were leaving campus. School buses pulled away one by one. Teachers carried stacks of papers toward their cars. The day looked normal, but inside the administration building, nothing felt normal anymore. Harris had spent the last hour trying to contain the fallout. Calls from parents, calls from reporters, calls from district administrators. Everyone wanted answers. No one had them. When the phone rang again, he almost ignored it. Almost. The caller ID displayed a number he didn't recognize. With a sigh, he picked up. Lincoln Heights High School, Principal Harris speaking. A calm female voice answered immediately. This is Andrea Collins from the governor's office. Everything inside the room seemed to stop. Harris blinked. I'm sorry? The governor's office. For a moment he thought he had misheard. Then the woman repeated herself, slowly, clearly. And suddenly every drop of color vanished from his face. Across the room, Assistant Principal Watkins looked up from a stack of reports. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Harris straightened in his chair. How can I help you? The voice remained professional. We are calling regarding the incident involving student Jasmine Carter. Silence. Heavy silence. The kind that settles over a room before a storm. Harris swallowed. I see. Do you? The question wasn't rude, but it carried weight. Real weight. The kind attached to authority. Andrea continued. The Office of Community Affairs has received multiple reports concerning today's incident. Reports. Plural. The word landed hard, because that meant the video had traveled farther than anyone imagined. Much farther. We are requesting that all surveillance footage be preserved. Harris glanced toward Watkins. The assistant principal immediately sat straighter. Of course. We are also requesting that all student recordings remain protected. The principal's stomach tightened. Protected. Not deleted. Protected. The exact opposite of what some people inside the building had suggested earlier. Andrea continued. No student should be pressured to remove evidence. The silence that followed felt deafening, because somehow the governor's office already knew. Not guesses, not rumors. They knew, and that realization frightened him. Very badly. We understand, Harris said. Good. The woman paused. Then came the sentence that changed everything. Miss Margaret Reynolds will be visiting Lincoln Heights tomorrow morning. Harris nearly dropped the phone. Miss Margaret Reynolds. Even he knew that name. Everyone in public administration knew that name. Director of Community Affairs. Advisor to the governor. One of the most respected figures in state government. A woman who didn't appear somewhere unless she had a reason. A serious reason. When exactly? Harris asked quietly. 9 o'clock. The line went silent for a moment. Then Andrea added one final instruction. Please inform your staff that cooperation is expected. The call ended. Harris lowered the receiver slowly. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Assistant Principal Watkins finally broke the silence. What happened? Harris looked at him. The expression on his face said everything. We have a problem. The words sounded much smaller than the reality, because the problem was no longer local, no longer a school issue, no longer something that could disappear with a few conversations and carefully written statements. State government was now involved, and state government had a name. Margaret Reynolds. Across Caldwell City, the same news was moving through different channels. Reporters talked. Political staff exchanged messages. Community leaders made calls. The video continued spreading. Thousands of views became tens of thousands. Then more. Parents discussed it over dinner. Students discussed it online. People who had never heard of Lincoln Heights suddenly knew exactly where it was. The story was growing, fast. At the Bennett residence, Mayor Thomas Bennett sat in his private office watching the numbers climb. Every refresh brought more views, more comments, more criticism. The mayor wasn't angry. Not yet. He was calculating, the way politicians often did, assessing risk, evaluating damage, determining strategy. His communications director stood nearby. We can get ahead of this. The mayor looked up. How? We release a statement. What kind of statement? The director hesitated. Something about misunderstandings. The mayor leaned back. No. The answer came instantly. No excuses. The director seemed surprised. No? Thomas Bennett shook his head. The video is clear. That much was true. The footage wasn't blurry, wasn't edited, wasn't confusing. Everyone could see exactly what happened. The mayor rubbed his temples. I'll speak with Chloe. For the first time all evening, he sounded tired. Not angry. Tired. Upstairs, Chloe sat alone in her bedroom. The mansion felt unusually quiet. Normally, she would have been texting friends, scrolling through social media, planning weekend activities. Tonight was different. Her phone buzzed constantly. Notifications arrived every few seconds. Most weren't supportive. Some were disappointed. Some were critical. Some were brutal. For the first time in years, Chloe discovered what public judgment felt like, and she hated it. She opened another message, then another, then another. Eventually, she threw the phone onto her bed. Her heart pounded. How had everything become so serious? It was one moment, one mistake, one bad decision. People were acting as though she had committed some unforgivable crime. A knock sounded at the door. Her father entered. Neither spoke immediately. The silence stretched. Finally, he sat down. Tell me exactly what happened. Chloe looked away. For the first time in her life, she wasn't sure how to explain herself, because every explanation sounded worse when spoken aloud. Across town, Jasmine Carter sat at her kitchen table. The atmosphere could not have been more different. The apartment smelled of baked chicken and cornbread. A baseball game played softly from the living room. Her grandmother folded laundry nearby. Life felt ordinary. Almost. Until the phone rang. Jasmine looked at the screen. Unknown number. She answered. Hello? A familiar voice responded. Jasmine. Her eyes widened immediately. Margaret? The older woman laughed gently. Good memory. A smile appeared despite everything. You called. I told you kindness finds its way back. For a moment, neither mentioned the video. Neither mentioned the luncheon. Neither mentioned Chloe. Instead, Margaret asked a simple question. How are you holding up? The kindness in her voice almost broke something inside Jasmine. Not because she felt weak, because she felt seen. truly seen. "I'm okay." Margaret didn't challenge the answer, but she knew. People who spent their lives helping others often became experts at hiding pain. The conversation lasted nearly 15 minutes. By the end, Jasmine felt lighter, stronger, less alone. Before hanging up, Margaret said something unexpected. "I'll see you tomorrow." Jasmine frowned. "Tomorrow?" "Yes." A smile touched Margaret's voice. "In person." The line disconnected. Jasmine stared at her phone. Confused. Curious. A little nervous. Across the state, meanwhile, Margaret Reynolds stood beside a window overlooking the Capitol grounds. The evening sky glowed orange and gold. Staff members hurried through hallways behind her. Preparations were already underway. Vehicles scheduled. Security coordinated. Schedules rearranged. One of her assistants approached. "Everything is confirmed." Margaret nodded. "Good." The assistant hesitated. "Do you really think this is necessary?" Margaret looked out at the fading sunlight. Then she remembered a soaked teenager in a community kitchen. A girl who gave away her only jacket without knowing who she was helping. A girl who expected nothing in return. "Yes," Margaret said quietly. "I do." The assistant followed her gaze toward the horizon. Neither spoke again. Because tomorrow was no longer just another day. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring consequences. And tomorrow morning, as students arrived at Lincoln Heights expecting an ordinary school day, 3 black SUVs would turn into the parking lot. The sight would stop conversations. It would stop rumors. It would stop excuses. And for the first time since the luncheon, Chloe Bennett would feel something she had never truly felt before. Fear. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Sunlight washed across the campus of Lincoln Heights High School. Students gathered in clusters near the front entrance. Teachers carried coffee cups through the parking lot. At first, everything appeared normal. Then someone pointed toward the road. A conversation stopped. Another followed. Within seconds, dozens of students were staring toward the main entrance. 3 black SUVs were turning into the parking lot. Slowly. Purposefully. The vehicles moved with the quiet confidence of people who never needed to announce their importance. The first SUV stopped, then the second, then the third. Silence spread through the crowd. Even students who had no idea what was happening could feel it. Something important was about to unfold. Inside the administration building, Principal Harris looked through his office window and immediately stood up. His stomach tightened. "They're here." Assistant Principal Watkins followed his gaze. Neither man spoke, because there was nothing left to say. The consequences had arrived. Outside, vehicle doors opened. Several professionally dressed staff members stepped out first. They moved efficiently, not dramatically, just professionally. Then the rear passenger door of the center SUV opened. A woman stepped onto the pavement, silver-streaked hair, dark blue blazer, calm eyes. The posture of someone who had spent years walking into difficult situations without fear. Margaret Reynolds. Students didn't recognize her immediately. Teachers did. The reaction was instant. One teacher actually stopped walking. Another whispered her name. A third stared in disbelief. Meanwhile, Jasmine Carter had just arrived from her first class. She stood near the courtyard with a notebook tucked beneath her arm. The moment she saw Margaret, surprise spread across her face. For half a second, she wondered if she was imagining things. Then Margaret smiled. The same warm smile from the community kitchen. The same smile from that rainy evening. And suddenly, Jasmine understood. The mysterious phone call, the concern, the message, all of it. Around them, students watched in confusion. They recognized Jasmine. They recognized the woman from television. What they didn't understand was why the two seemed to know each other. Margaret walked directly toward her, not toward the principal, not toward the reporters beginning to gather, toward Jasmine. The entire courtyard watched. When Margaret reached her, she opened her arms. Jasmine hesitated only a moment before returning the embrace. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Phones appeared instantly. Cameras pointed in every direction. Nobody understood what they were seeing, but everyone knew it mattered. "It's good to see you again," Margaret said. "You too." Jasmine smiled. The tension she had carried since yesterday eased slightly. Margaret stepped back and looked at her carefully. "You doing okay?" The question was genuine, not political, not performative. Genuine. Jasmine nodded. "I'm all right." Margaret studied her face. Then she smiled softly. "That's what I thought you'd say." Nearby, Chloe stood frozen. She had come outside with several friends after hearing about the SUVs. Now she stared across the courtyard. At first, she simply felt confused. Then recognition struck. The woman from the news, the woman her father sometimes mentioned, the woman who worked directly with the governor's administration, the woman currently standing beside Jasmine Carter. A chill moved through her. One of Chloe's friends whispered nervously, "Why does she know Jasmine?" Nobody answered, because nobody knew, not yet. Margaret eventually turned toward Principal Harris. "Good morning." The principal forced a smile. "Miss Reynolds, thank you for meeting with us." The words sounded polite, but everyone could hear the authority beneath them. Margaret requested the use of the auditorium. Within 30 minutes, students, teachers, reporters, and guests filled the room. The atmosphere felt electric. Speculation spread through every row. Whispers bounced from seat to seat. Questions multiplied. At the center of it all sat Jasmine, still confused, still humble, still completely unaware of how many lives she had already touched. Margaret stepped onto the stage. The room became silent. She looked across hundreds of faces, then began speaking. "I came to Caldwell City this morning because something important happened yesterday." Everyone listened. Some leaned forward. Others held their phones ready. Margaret continued, "But I didn't come here only because of a video." The audience exchanged glances. "If that were the reason, I could have made a phone call." A pause. "I came because I know Jasmine Carter." The silence deepened. Margaret looked toward Jasmine. Then she told the story. The storm, the community kitchen, the injured stranger, the jacket, the hot meal, the taxi, the kindness offered with absolutely no expectation of reward. As she spoke, images seemed to come alive inside the minds of those listening. Students who barely noticed Jasmine before suddenly saw her differently. Teachers who already respected her felt even more admiration. Even reporters lowered their cameras for a moment. The story wasn't dramatic. It wasn't flashy. It was simply good. And goodness had become rare enough to feel extraordinary. Margaret's voice softened. "When I arrived at that community kitchen, Jasmine didn't know my title." She smiled. "She didn't know my position." Another pause. "She didn't even know my last name." A few people laughed quietly. She only saw someone who needed help. The room remained completely still. Across the auditorium, Chloe slowly lowered her eyes. Something uncomfortable was growing inside her chest. Not anger, not resentment. Something worse. Shame. Margaret continued. I have spent my career meeting people from every corner of this state. She looked around the room. Business leaders, lawmakers, executives, community organizers, but character reveals itself when nobody important is watching. Her eyes found Jasmine again, and this young woman showed more character in one rainy evening than many adults show in a lifetime. The applause started slowly, then spread, then grew louder. Soon the entire auditorium was clapping. Teachers, students, parents, guests, even people who had never spoken to Jasmine before. Jasmine sat frozen, embarrassed, overwhelmed. Her eyes filled slightly, not from sadness, from something she rarely experienced. Recognition. Real recognition. Not for grades, not for popularity, not for appearance, for who she actually was. The applause eventually faded. Margaret smiled, then delivered another surprise. This story is only part of the reason I'm here. The room instantly became silent again. Reporters lifted cameras. Students exchanged curious looks. Margaret opened a folder resting on the podium. Inside was a document. Official. Important. Her next words would change everything, and somewhere near the back of the auditorium, Chloe Bennett felt her heartbeat accelerate. Because whatever came next, she knew one thing. The story was no longer about her. It was about Jasmine Carter, and the entire state was beginning to notice. The auditorium remained silent. Hundreds of people watched Margaret Reynolds standing beneath the stage lights with a folder in her hands. The sunlight streaming through the high windows painted soft golden rectangles across the floor. Nobody moved. Nobody whispered. Even the reporters seemed to forget about their cameras for a moment. The anticipation was almost physical. Margaret opened the folder. Then she looked directly at Jasmine. The young woman immediately felt every eye in the room shift toward her. She wished they wouldn't. Attention had never been comfortable. Praise had never been something she chased. Most of her life had been spent working quietly in the background, helping, serving, showing up. That had always been enough, but this moment belonged to something larger. Margaret smiled. Several months ago, our office began reviewing nominations for the State Youth Leadership Fellowship. A few people in the audience exchanged curious glances. The fellowship was famous, competitive, prestigious. Students from across the state competed every year. Only a handful were selected. Margaret continued. We received thousands of applications. The room remained silent, and after extensive review, one name continued appearing in recommendation letters. She looked at Jasmine again. Jasmine Carter. A murmur moved through the audience. Jasmine's eyes widened. She had never submitted an application, never attended an interview, never campaigned for recognition. She looked genuinely confused. Margaret laughed softly. That's because she didn't nominate herself. Several people smiled. Others nominated her. The statement landed differently, stronger, because there was something powerful about being recognized by people you had helped. Teachers nodded. Volunteers from St. Matthew's sitting near the back smiled proudly. Even Principal Harris looked surprised. Margaret continued. Based on those recommendations, our office has officially selected Jasmine Carter as this year's fellowship recipient. For a heartbeat, the room remained frozen. Then applause erupted. Loud, sincere, relentless. People rose to their feet. Teachers, students, parents, community leaders. The standing ovation seemed to shake the room. Jasmine sat motionless, stunned. Her hands trembled slightly. Not because she wanted attention, because she couldn't believe what was happening. For the first time since her father's death, She felt something she had not experienced in years. The feeling that maybe life was opening a door. Maybe all the difficult years had meant something. Maybe kindness had a way of traveling farther than anyone realized. Across the auditorium, Chloe Bennett lowered her eyes. The applause sounded different now. Not painful, just honest. For years, she had received applause because of who her father was, because of photographs, because of appearances. This applause belonged entirely to Jasmine. There was no political influence behind it, no campaign staff, no carefully managed image, just character. The realization sat heavily inside her chest. The applause eventually faded. Margaret waited patiently. Then she surprised everyone again.
Thank you. Good
There is
evening.
something else.
Pleasure to be here with you.
Immediately, the room became silent. Reporters lifted cameras. Notebook pages turned. Students leaned forward. Margaret's expression grew serious. This fellowship includes a full scholarship package. The audience gasped. Jasmine blinked. She wasn't sure she had heard correctly. A full academic scholarship, Margaret continued, along with leadership training, mentorship opportunities, and direct support through college. Tears instantly appeared in Evelyn Carter's eyes. Jasmine's grandmother covered her mouth. For years, she had worried about tuition, about costs, about opportunities her granddaughter deserved but might never receive. And now, suddenly, everything looked different. Across the room, Jasmine saw her grandmother crying. The sight nearly broke her composure. She had promised herself she wouldn't cry. Not here. Not in front of everyone. Yet her vision blurred anyway. Margaret noticed. She smiled gently. Sometimes good things happen to good people. The audience applauded again, but this time something else was happening beyond the auditorium walls. Something nobody inside could yet see. The video from the luncheon had continued spreading overnight. Local news stations picked it up. Regional outlets followed. Then state media. The story evolved. At first, it was simply a school incident. Then people learned about Jasmine. Then they learned about Margaret Reynolds. And suddenly, public interest exploded. By lunchtime, reporters were digging deeper. Questions expanded. People began asking about Chloe Bennett, about previous incidents, about rumors, about complaints that had quietly disappeared over the years. Stories started resurfacing. Old stories, uncomfortable stories. A former restaurant employee described an incident involving Chloe and several friends. A former student shared a story about bullying. Another family described a situation that had mysteriously vanished after a phone call from someone connected to City Hall. Individually, none of the stories proved much. Together, they painted a picture, and the picture was troubling. Very troubling. Meanwhile, inside a small downtown newsroom, veteran journalist Daniel Mercer sat reviewing messages. Mercer had covered Caldwell City politics for nearly 20 years. He recognized patterns, and lately, certain patterns kept appearing. His phone buzzed. Another message arrived. Anonymous. Short. Simple. I have records. Mercer frowned. The sender attached a photograph. The image showed a weathered manila folder. Nothing remarkable, except for the words written across the tab. Mayor's office. Mercer's pulse quickened. A second message arrived. We need to talk. He stared at the screen. Every reporter knows certain moments matter. Certain moments change careers. Certain moments uncover truths. This felt like one of them. 3 hours later, Mercer sat inside a small diner on the edge of town. Rain clouds gathered outside. Coffee steamed between his hands. Across from him sat an older man wearing a worn work jacket. The man's face carried years of frustration, years of silence. My name is Walter Pierce, he said quietly. Mercer recognized it immediately. Former administrative coordinator, City Hall, retired 5 years earlier. The reporter leaned forward. What do you have? Walter placed the manila folder on the table. For several seconds, he simply stared at it, as though deciding whether to open a door that could never be closed again. Finally, he spoke. I've been carrying this for years. The diner suddenly felt smaller. The rain began tapping against the windows. Walter opened the folder. Documents, letters, internal communications, meeting notes, not criminal evidence, not dramatic scandals, something different, a record, a pattern. Examples of influence being used where influence should never have been used. Complaints quietly dismissed. Rules applied differently depending on who was involved. Special treatment, pressure, favors. Mercer slowly turned pages. His expression darkened. Why now? Walter looked out the window. For a long time he didn't answer. Then he spoke softly. Because I watched that girl on television. The reporter knew immediately which girl. Jasmine. Walter nodded. She reminded me of my daughter. His voice cracked slightly. People like her work twice as hard for half as much. Silence filled the booth. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. Walter looked down at the folder. I stayed quiet too long. Mercer understood. Sometimes stories begin with outrage. Sometimes they begin with courage. This one contained both. Back at Lincoln Heights, Jasmine spent the afternoon answering questions she never expected to answer. Teachers congratulated her. Students shook her hand. Volunteers from St. Matthew's called. The attention felt overwhelming. But something else happened too. For the first time, students who had barely noticed her before began seeing her differently. Not because of the scholarship, because of the story behind it. The story of a girl who helped someone without knowing who they were. The story of a girl who remained kind when nobody was watching. The story felt bigger than money, bigger than awards, bigger than politics. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Daniel Mercer drove toward his office with Walter Pierce's folder beside him. The rain intensified. Windshield wipers moved steadily. His mind raced, because the documents didn't merely raise questions. They connected threads that led toward City Hall, toward powerful people, toward the Bennett family. And if the documents were genuine, they were only the beginning. By evening, Mercer had already started writing. By midnight, he would make several phone calls. And by the following morning, Caldwell City would wake up to a story nobody expected. A story capable of changing everything. Because Walter Pierce wasn't the only person who had been waiting years to speak. He was simply the first. And once one person finds the courage to tell the truth, others often follow. Very soon, many others would. The story hit Caldwell City like a thunderstorm before dawn. People woke to news alerts. Radio hosts discussed it during morning broadcasts. Television stations interrupted regular programming to cover new developments. By 7 o'clock, Daniel Mercer's article had spread across the city. The headline wasn't explosive. It didn't need to be. The facts spoke loudly enough on their own. Questions about preferential treatment. Surface around mayor's office. People clicked, people read, and people started talking. Inside coffee shops, diners, barbershops, and office break rooms, conversations drifted toward the same subject. The Bennett family. The article didn't accuse anyone of crimes. It didn't make dramatic claims. Instead, it presented a pattern, a series of incidents, special exceptions, complaints that disappeared, rules applied differently depending on who was involved. For years, many residents had quietly suspected such things. Now they were seeing names, dates, documents. And once people start connecting dots, they rarely stop. At City Hall, the atmosphere shifted immediately. Staff members moved through hallways with unusual tension. Conversations stopped when certain people entered rooms. Phones rang constantly. Public relations officers scrambled. The mayor's communications team scheduled emergency meetings. Mayor Thomas Bennett sat at the head of a conference table reviewing printed copies of Mercer's article. His expression remained calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that often appears just before pressure begins breaking through. Around him sat advisors, lawyers, communications specialists, political consultants. Every one of them looked worried. One consultant cleared his throat. "We need to respond." Another shook his head. "Respond to what?" "The article doesn't actually accuse him of anything illegal." A third disagreed. "It doesn't need to." The room fell silent. Because everyone understood. Politics wasn't only about legality. It was about perception, trust, narrative, and the narrative was changing. Fast. Thomas Bennett finally looked up. "What else?" The communications director hesitated, then slid another report across the table. The mayor opened it. His jaw tightened. More former city employees had contacted reporters overnight. Not one, not two, 7. Several planned to speak publicly. Others had provided documents, statements, emails, notes. Individually, none seemed devastating. Together, they painted an increasingly uncomfortable picture, a picture of influence, privilege, protection. The mayor closed the folder, slowly, carefully, as though the movement itself required effort. Outside the conference room windows, Caldwell City looked beautiful beneath the morning sun. Inside, however, cracks were beginning to appear. Meanwhile, Jasmine Carter spent the morning exactly where she always spent Saturday mornings. St. Matthew's Community Kitchen. The scholarship announcement had changed many things, but it hadn't changed her routine. She still arrived before most volunteers, still helped unload supplies, still carried boxes, still served meals. The waiting room remained crowded. Families, retirees, veterans, people facing difficult seasons, the same people she had been helping long before cameras appeared. Mrs. Linda watched Jasmine wipe down tables, then shook her head. "What?" The older woman smiled. "You've been on television 3 times in 2 days." Jasmine laughed. So normal people don't come back to mop floors after that." Jasmine grabbed another cleaning cloth. "Good thing I'm not normal." The 2 women laughed. Nearby, several volunteers smiled. The attention surrounding Jasmine had become impossible to ignore. Yet she remained exactly the same. No entourage, no interviews, no ego, just work. That consistency impressed people more than the scholarship itself, because character is easiest to recognize when success arrives and changes nothing. Across town, Chloe Bennett sat alone in her bedroom. The silence felt unfamiliar, painfully unfamiliar. Her phone lay on the nightstand, face down. She no longer checked it constantly. The messages had changed. Old friends replied slower. Some didn't reply at all. Group chats continued without her. Invitations stopped arriving. The shift wasn't dramatic. It was worse. Gradual. The kind of loneliness that arrives quietly. One absence at a time. She stared through her bedroom window. Beyond the glass, the city stretched toward the horizon. The same city that once felt like it belonged to her. Now it felt distant. Almost foreign. A knock sounded. Her mother entered carrying a cup of tea. Neither spoke immediately. Finally, her mother sat beside her. "How are you doing?" Chloe laughed bitterly. Everybody keeps asking that. Because they're worried. No. The answer came quickly. They're embarrassed. Her mother remained silent. Sometimes the truth hurts because it sounds familiar. Chloe looked away. For the first time in years, she wasn't angry. She was confused. Confused about herself, about the people around her, about everything she thought she understood. The silence stretched. Eventually, she asked a question. A simple one. Do you think I'm a bad person? Her mother didn't answer immediately. Instead, she chose her words carefully. No. Chloe looked relieved. Then came the second part. I think you've made some bad choices. The relief disappeared, because deep down she knew. She knew exactly which choice her mother meant. Later that afternoon, another story appeared online. Then another, and another. Former classmates began speaking publicly. Former employees, former volunteers. Nothing catastrophic, nothing criminal, but enough to create momentum. Enough to raise more questions. Enough to keep reporters digging. By evening, national outlets began mentioning Caldwell City. The mayor's approval ratings dropped sharply in overnight polling. Political donors started calling. Party leaders requested meetings. Pressure multiplied. Inside the Bennett household, nobody slept particularly well. Not the mayor, not his wife, and certainly not Chloe. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. While reporters focused on controversy, another video quietly began spreading online. Not the luncheon video, a different one, several months old. Recorded on a volunteer's phone at St. Matthew's Community Kitchen. The video showed Jasmine helping an elderly man carry groceries. Nothing dramatic, no speeches, no music, no production, just kindness. Another clip surfaced. Jasmine reading to children during a literacy program. Then another. Helping organize winter coat donations. Then another. Delivering meals during a snowstorm. The internet noticed. People shared them, commented, reacted. Thousands of strangers began discussing Jasmine. Not because she had become famous, because she reminded them of someone, a daughter, a granddaughter, a neighbor, a teacher. The kind of person communities quietly depend upon. The contrast between the two young women became impossible to ignore. One had spent years receiving attention. The other had spent years giving attention away, and public opinion responded accordingly. That evening, Chloe sat alone scrolling through videos she had avoided all week. One after another. Jasmine helping people. Jasmine smiling. Jasmine volunteering. Jasmine listening. Eventually, Chloe stopped scrolling. A strange feeling settled over her. Not jealousy, not resentment. Regret. Because for the first time, she saw Jasmine clearly. Not as competition, not as a symbol, not as someone beneath her, as a person, a genuinely good person. And suddenly, the memory of the luncheon felt even worse. Much worse. Her phone buzzed. A message arrived from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then, curiosity won. The message contained only a link. Nothing else. Chloe opened it. A video began playing. At first, she didn't understand what she was seeing. Then, recognition hit. Her breathing slowed. Her eyes widened. The video had been recorded years earlier, inside a charity event. Her father was speaking with several city officials. The footage itself wasn't scandalous. But the conversation happening in the background caught her attention. Names, companies, decisions, comments she vaguely remembered hearing before. Things she never questioned. Things she suddenly couldn't stop questioning. The video ended. Chloe stared at the screen. A cold feeling moved through her chest. because for the first time in her life, she wasn't questioning strangers. She was questioning her own family, and that realization frightened her more than any headline ever could. Outside, night settled over Caldwell City. Streetlights flickered on. Traffic moved through downtown. Life continued. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had changed. People were talking. People were questioning. People were finally paying attention. And once a city begins asking difficult questions, answers often follow. Some of those answers were already on their way. The next one would arrive much closer to home than Chloe Bennett ever expected. The video replayed 3 times, then 4, then 5. Chloe sat alone in her bedroom long after midnight, staring at the screen of her phone. Outside her window, the lights of Caldwell City shimmered beneath a blanket of darkness. The city looked peaceful, but inside the Bennett home, peace had become difficult to find. The footage itself wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no scandalous confession, no obvious wrongdoing, just fragments, conversations, comments, references, pieces that, when placed beside everything else now emerging in public, suddenly seemed impossible to ignore. For the first time in her life, Chloe found herself asking questions she had spent years avoiding. Questions about her father, questions about privilege, questions about herself. The realization hurt, not because she hated her father. She loved him. That was the problem. When you love someone deeply, seeing their flaws can feel like watching a crack spread through the foundation of your own home. You don't want it to be real. But once you see it, you can't unsee it. Downstairs, another light remained on. Her father's office. Thomas Bennett was still awake, still taking calls, still managing crises, still trying to hold together pieces that seemed determined to come apart. The entire house felt different now. Quieter, heavier, more honest. Chloe eventually set down her phone and walked toward the hallway. For a moment, she considered knocking on his office door, asking questions, demanding answers. Instead, she turned away. She wasn't ready, not yet. The next morning arrived gray and overcast. A steady drizzle coated Caldwell City. Rain streaked across storefront windows. Traffic moved slowly through downtown streets. The weather seemed to mirror the city's mood. Uncertain, heavy, reflective. At St. Matthew's Community Kitchen, Jasmine Carter stood near a large coffee urn, helping prepare breakfast service. The room smelled of cinnamon, eggs, and fresh biscuits. Volunteers moved quietly through their routines. Life continued, as it always did. For Jasmine, the past week felt surreal. Scholarships, television interviews, state officials, news stories, none of it felt entirely real. Yet here she was, refilling coffee cups, carrying trays, helping people, exactly where she had been before everything changed. Mrs. Linda approached with a knowing smile. "You know, most people would have disappeared by now." Jasmine laughed softly. "To where?" "Oh, I don't know. Fame, success,
All right,
one of those fancy places."
on the first try.
Jasmine shook her head.
Thank you.
"I like it here." The older woman nodded. "I know you do." That was the thing about Jasmine. People trusted her because she never seemed interested in becoming important. She was interested in being useful, and somehow that made her important anyway. Around noon, as volunteers finished lunch preparations, Jasmine stepped outside for fresh air. Rain fell lightly. The parking lot glistened. The city beyond seemed wrapped in soft gray mist. She stood beneath the awning for several minutes, enjoying the quiet. Then she noticed a figure approaching, a young woman. Alone. No reporters. No cameras. No entourage. Just a dark jacket and nervous steps. Jasmine recognized her immediately. Chloe Bennett, The realization caught her completely off guard. For a moment, neither moved. The rain continued falling. Cars passed in the distance. A bus hissed to a stop several blocks away. Ordinary sounds, an ordinary afternoon, yet something significant was happening. Chloe stopped a few feet away. She looked different. Not physically, emotionally. The confidence was gone. The certainty was gone. Even her posture seemed smaller, more human. For several seconds, she struggled to speak. Words had never been difficult for Chloe before. Today, they felt impossible. Finally, she managed a quiet greeting. "Hi." Jasmine nodded. "Hi." Silence followed. Long, uncomfortable, necessary. The kind of silence that appears before honesty. Chloe looked down at the wet pavement, then back up, then down again. Her hands trembled slightly. When she finally spoke, her voice barely sounded like her own.
It was wrong.
"I'm sorry."
And I really hope
The words hung in the air. Simple, direct, unpolished.
I know saying
Real.
sorry isn't enough,
Jasmine didn't respond immediately.
but I truly
She simply listened. So Chloe continued. "I've practiced this conversation 100 times. A weak laugh escaped her. Maybe more. The rain tapped softly against the awning overhead. I kept trying to find the right thing to say. Her eyes filled, and every version sounded fake. Jasmine remained quiet. Not cold, not angry,
Because it matters.
just listening.
Chloe.
Really listening.
It matters to me that you
Something Chloe wasn't used to receiving.
what happened that
So she kept talking. "The truth is," she said softly, "I was awful to you." The admission seemed to cost her something, but it wasn't just that day. Her voice cracked. It wasn't just lunch. Another pause. It was everything before that too. The words came faster now, years of avoidance finally breaking apart. The comments, the jokes, the assumptions. The way I looked at you. She wiped at her eyes, embarrassed, ashamed. I told myself it wasn't a big deal. A bitter smile appeared. But it was. Jasmine looked at her calmly, the same calmness that had unsettled Chloe in the cafeteria. Only now it felt different, comforting, safe. "I don't expect forgiveness," Chloe said. "I don't deserve it." The honesty surprised even her. For the first time in years, she wasn't performing. She wasn't managing impressions. She wasn't protecting herself. She was simply telling the truth. And the truth hurt. Jasmine finally spoke. "What made you come here?" The question wasn't hostile.
Does
It was
this
genuine.
make you think about things
Chloe stared toward the rain, thinking, searching.
I really thought
Eventually, she answered,
no, that's
"Because everything fell apart."
why did I
Then she shook her
do
head.
that?
"No." A sad smile appeared. "That's not actually true." She took a deep breath. "I came because I finally saw myself." The words settled between them. Heavy, honest, powerful. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Jasmine looked out toward the street. Cars moved through the rain. People hurried beneath umbrellas. Life continued, as it always did. Finally, she said something that Chloe would remember for the rest of her life. "What happened to your family isn't the lesson." Chloe blinked. "What do you mean?" Jasmine turned toward her. "The lesson happened before all of that." The younger woman's eyes remained steady. "The moment you decided who I was without knowing me." Silence. Pure silence. The rain seemed louder now. "The moment you looked at my clothes, my neighborhood, my skin, and decided that told you everything." Chloe lowered her eyes. Because it was true. Painfully true. Jasmine continued gently. That moment matters more than the lunchroom. The words weren't cruel.
Can't keep
They weren't
going.
meant to
This
punish.
can't happen.
They were meant to teach. The slap wasn't the beginning. It was the result. Chloe felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Not dramatic tears. Quiet ones. The kind that arrive when a truth finally reaches somewhere deep. For years, she had blamed circumstances, friends, pressure, politics, entitlement. Now she was being forced to confront something much simpler. Choice. She had made choices. Bad ones. Jasmine watched her carefully. Then she offered something unexpected. Grace.
Take this one.
Not forgiveness.
Clear up later.
Not absolution. Grace.
Thank you.
The fact that you're here matters.
Very kind.
Chloe looked up, surprised. Jasmine smiled softly. Most people spend their whole lives avoiding uncomfortable truths. The rain began easing. Clouds shifted overhead. A small patch of sunlight appeared beyond the rooftops. You showed up. The words were simple, yet they landed harder than any accusation. Because Jasmine was giving her an opportunity, not a free pass. An opportunity. What do I do now? Chloe asked. The question sounded almost childlike. Lost. Honest. Jasmine thought for a moment, then smiled. The same thing everyone else does. Chloe waited. Try to become better than you were yesterday. Neither spoke afterward. They simply stood together beneath the awning, listening to the rain. Two young women whose lives had collided in the worst possible way. Now sharing a quiet moment neither would forget. Across the street, unnoticed by either of them, a reporter sitting inside a parked car lowered his camera. He had followed Chloe there, expecting drama, conflict, a headline. Instead, he found something else. Growth. And somehow that felt far more important. As the clouds slowly parted above Caldwell City, another chapter was beginning. One built not on power, not on influence, not on revenge, but on the difficult, uncomfortable work of becoming someone better. And for Chloe Bennett, that work had finally begun. 6 weeks later, autumn arrived in Caldwell City. The leaves along Main Street turned shades of gold and crimson. Cool winds drifted through neighborhoods. School buses rolled beneath trees painted in fall colors. Life moved forward, as it always did. But for many people in Caldwell City, life no longer looked quite the same. Investigations continued. Reporters kept asking questions. Former officials continued speaking publicly. Mayor Thomas Bennett had stepped away from public appearances while legal and political reviews moved forward. The city council appointed temporary leadership. Committees formed. Policies were reviewed. The headlines remained busy. Yet slowly, public attention began shifting towards something else, something hopeful, something worth celebrating. The State Youth Leadership Fellowship Ceremony. The event would be held inside the historic Hamilton Civic Center, a beautiful building with marble floors, tall windows, and a grand auditorium capable of seating nearly 1,000 people. Students from across the state would attend. Educators, community leaders, families, volunteers, people who believed in service, people who believed in possibility. And on this particular morning, one young woman sat quietly backstage, trying to steady her nerves. Jasmine Carter adjusted the sleeves of her navy blue dress. Nothing expensive, nothing flashy. Simple, elegant. The kind of dress her grandmother had insisted looked perfect. A volunteer peeked through the curtain. "They're almost ready." Jasmine nodded. Her stomach fluttered. Not from fear, from gratitude. A few feet away sat Evelyn Carter, the woman who had raised her, protected her, believed in her during years when life seemed determined to test them. Today, Evelyn wore her best outfit, a cream-colored jacket she reserved for important occasions. She looked proud and emotional, very emotional. Every few minutes, she reached for tissues, then pretended she wasn't crying. Jasmine smiled. "You okay, Grandma?" Evelyn laughed through watery eyes. No, that answer made them both laugh. Then the older woman reached for her granddaughter's hand. "Your father would have loved this." The room grew quiet. Jasmine looked down. The words still carried power, even after all this time. Especially after all this time. For a moment, she imagined him sitting beside them, smiling, proud, telling her not to worry. The image felt so real that she almost turned her head expecting to see him. Instead, she squeezed her grandmother's hand and smiled. Across the auditorium, hundreds of guests filled rows of seats. Soft music played, conversations drifted through the air, camera flashes sparkled occasionally. Near the back sat someone Jasmine didn't expect, Chloe Bennett, alone, no friends, no special attention. Just another person in the audience. She had arrived quietly, taken a seat quietly, and intended to leave quietly. But she felt she needed to be there, not for publicity, not for appearances, for herself. Over the previous month, Chloe's life had changed dramatically. The changes weren't dramatic enough for headlines. They were personal. She had begun volunteering twice a week at a legal aid center serving low-income families. The first few days had been uncomfortable. The first few weeks had been humbling. She made mistakes, asked foolish questions, learned difficult lessons. Yet she kept showing up. Because for the first time in her life, she was trying to earn respect instead of expecting it. The process was harder than she imagined, and far more rewarding. The auditorium lights dimmed, conversations faded. The ceremony began. One by one, student leaders were recognized, scholarships awarded, achievements celebrated. Applause filled the room repeatedly. Then Jasmine's name was announced. The reaction surprised even the organizers. The audience immediately stood. Not everyone, but enough. Enough to create another standing ovation. Jasmine froze briefly, then slowly walked toward the stage. The applause continued. Teachers cheered. Volunteers from St. Matthew's cheered. Students from Lincoln Heights cheered. Margaret Reynolds smiled proudly from the front row. And Evelyn Carter cried openly, no longer pretending. Jasmine reached the podium. The applause gradually faded. The microphone waited. The room grew quiet. Nearly 1,000 people watched. She took a breath, then another, and began. "When people tell stories like this," she said softly, "they usually focus on one moment." The audience listened. "The moment everything changes." She smiled. "But I've learned that life doesn't really work that way." Silence filled the room. The moments people see are important. The moments nobody sees are important too. Several people nodded. Jasmine continued. "I wasn't raised by powerful people." She glanced toward her grandmother. "I was raised by good people." Evelyn immediately covered her mouth. Fresh tears appeared. "My father worked hard every day." Jasmine's voice softened. He wasn't famous. He wasn't wealthy. But he believed kindness mattered. The room remained perfectly still. No phones, no whispers, only listening. "He used to tell me that you don't help people because they're important." A pause. "You help people because they matter." The words settled over the audience like sunlight. Warm, simple, true. Jasmine smiled. "And every good thing that's happened to me started long before any scholarship. long before any television cameras,
mentor,
long before any headlines.
guiding me every
She looked toward Margaret Reynolds. It started with people who chose kindness when nobody was watching. Several audience members wiped away tears. Others simply sat quietly, thinking, remembering, feeling. Then Jasmine delivered the final part of her speech, the part nobody expected. The greatest thing in this world isn't power, silence. It isn't influence. Another pause. It isn't money. Her voice remained calm, certain. The greatest thing in this world is the ability to make another person's life better. The room erupted into applause, not loud at first, deep, meaningful, the kind of applause that comes from the heart. People rose to their feet. Again. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. When it finally ended, Margaret Reynolds stepped onto the stage. A smile brightened her face. She carried a second folder, one Jasmine had never seen before. The audience gradually settled. Margaret approached the microphone. There is one final announcement. Immediately, curiosity returned. People exchanged glances. Margaret looked toward Jasmine, then toward Evelyn, then out across the auditorium. A few weeks ago, I began speaking with several community leaders. She opened the folder. What started as a conversation became an idea. Jasmine frowned slightly. She had no idea where this was going. Margaret smiled. Today, I am honored to announce the creation of the Marcus Carter Community Scholarship Fund. The room gasped. Jasmine froze. Completely. The name echoed through the auditorium. Marcus Carter, her father. Margaret continued. The fund will support students from working-class families throughout this state. The audience applauded. The students who work hard. The students who serve others. The students who may never receive attention but deserve opportunity. Jasmine's eyes filled instantly. She looked at her grandmother. Evelyn was openly crying now, hands trembling, heart overflowing. The applause grew louder. And for one brief moment, Jasmine imagined her father again. Not sick, not struggling, not tired, just smiling, the way he always had. Proud, very proud. Near the back of the auditorium, Chloe stood and joined the applause. Tears filled her eyes too, not because the moment belonged to her, because it didn't. For the first time in her life, she understood that not every meaningful story required her to be at the center. Some stories were meant to teach. This one certainly had. Later that afternoon, after the ceremony ended and guests drifted toward receptions and photographs, Jasmine slipped away. She drove across town, past downtown, past the waterfront, past the neighborhoods where her life had unfolded. Eventually, she arrived at St. Matthew's Community Kitchen. The building looked exactly the same. Peeling paint, cracked pavement, warm lights. The same place where everything had quietly begun. Inside, volunteers were serving dinner. Families filled tables. Children laughed. Coffee brewed. Life continued, as it always did. Jasmine grabbed an apron, tied it around her waist, and stepped behind the serving line. Mrs. Linda stared. "You serious?" Jasmine laughed. "Somebody has to help." The older woman shook her head, smiling. "Your father would be proud." This time Jasmine didn't look away. She simply smiled, because she knew. Outside, the evening sun settled over Caldwell City. Golden light reflected from windows. Traffic moved steadily through streets. People hurried home. The city continued forward. Changed. Not perfect, but better. And somewhere beyond the fading horizon, one truth remained. Power can open doors. Money can create opportunities. Influence can change circumstances. But kindness changes lives. And sometimes, one small act of kindness can change far more lives than anyone ever imagines. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below.
Do you believe one act of kindness can change a person's destiny? When Jasmine Carter stood behind the serving line at Matthew Community Kitchens after receiving her scholarship, she proved that the most important thing she gained was never the award itself. It was the fact that success hadn't changed who she was. This story is really about the price of judgment and the lesson hidden inside regret. Globin's biggest mistake wasn't what happened in the cafeteria. It was deciding who Jasmine was before even taking the time to know her. Think about one person you may have quietly judged too quickly. The next time you meet someone like Jasmine, give them a chance to tell their story before you decide who they are. If this story means something to you, comment one below and tell me this. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your opinion after you got to know them? I love to read your story and stay with me because the next story may challenge the way you see kindness in a way you never expected.